with a little bit more of a tripod type professional setup. There's no parking here, by the way. But today I'm actually doing this because we're actually having our first in-person gathering this morning, and very excited about. We're actually having it at a place just around the corner from me. And so, anyways, like I said, just wanted to be really just keeping everybody in the loop over the next couple of weeks, and really just weekly of what's going on here. Obviously, I think with us gathering this morning, I'm excited about it. I'm going to be preaching this morning. We're wrapping up, not really wrapping up the entire book, but we're definitely going to be at the last few messages here of the book of Jude. So very excited about that, and and looking forward to wrapping that up. If you're wondering, okay, we're going to start in about an hour, and if you're still in need of a location of where we're meeting today, please reach out. You can direct message me here on Facebook, or you can again check in with the community group leader, or send me a text if you have my number. And you got an hour to get ready and to get where we're meeting. It's going to be great, and very excited about preaching this morning. One of the things, again, as we talk about looking ahead, as we talked about last week, is that, you know, in the midst of the pandemic, a lot of the times, especially if you're in your own, you know, well, if you're attending a church anywhere, you can feel like, man, I'm not really sure what's going on. I don't really know, you know, are we still doing church? Like, is church still a thing? And maybe you feel more that way at our church than others. And I think a large portion of that, just with me working and some things like that, it can be difficult to get out ahead. And but we try to do that, obviously, and part of my effort in that is this. And so if you know someone that's attached to our church, or kind of in the larger community of our church, and you haven't seen them for a minute, this might be a good video to send them and say, hey, this is what's going on and what's coming up. And so, especially as we talk about, you know, our vision, our mission here at our church of leading people in a growing relationship with Jesus. And of course, as we've been talking about for the past nearly 8 weeks, about being a disciple who makes disciples, because that's really the command. That's really the thing that we want to be passionate about as believers, as we're tempted to be passionate about so many different things during the season. And I'm not even saying there's not valid things to be passionate about right now, but as a follower of Jesus, we don't want to get off target. And so I'm grateful for the weekly gathering that we have, even like today now in person, to be able to really kind of place our eyes on something more transcendent and eternal, because I don't know about you, but I need that from time to time. And so I'm looking forward to that. But again, you know, there are things that are happening throughout the week, and everybody's comfort level is going to be a little bit different. But I would also say, don't let this season pull you into some, you know, odd approach to gathering with the saints. You know, if you're uncomfortable gathering in person, then you need to be gathering online and faithfully. We need the community. You need the community, and I'm grateful for what we're going to do gathering in person today. But you know, we've got several gathering opportunities, and so I just want to, you know, speak to you, especially if you're part of our church and you've just kind of fallen off attending anything. Like, don't do that. You need this. You need the Word of God. You need the prayer of God's people. You need the fellowship of God's people. You need this more than you realize. And oftentimes, in our pride and really in an attack of the enemy, he will tell us, you know, yeah, you don't need it. It's just, you know, this is life now. You can do Christianity on your own, and nowhere in the Bible do you find that. Nowhere in the New Testament do you find that. And so why I'm saying that is because on Tuesdays, I lead facilitate a group with several couples. Looking forward to having some new couples join us this week that we've met during the week last week. So that's exciting. And that's going to be a great time together. And that's on every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. And so these last only about an hour. So 8:30, you're still getting the kids, you're still getting a good night's sleep, or you still got time to watch your Netflix show or whatever it is before you go to bed. And then Wednesday night, James, he leads a great group. It's more of like a Bible study. Again, mentioned last week, they're studying through the book of Ecclesiastes. Phenomenal book to be going through right now, and highly recommend his group. We highly recommend both our groups, and we're excited about his group. And they meet at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday nights. And then we had our first men's effectiveness discipleship meeting on Thursday. And great group of guys turned out. And so if you're still interested in doing something like that, we're actually going to be meeting at Keen's Coffee in Tustin at 5 p.m. I jump over from work over in Costa Mesa a little early on those days. And we have a great time of fellowship, took some prayer requests, encouraged people. And one of the things that I loved about this particular meeting was that, some guys were just honest about, man, this sort of stuff makes me uncomfortable. And we got to challenge them a little bit and challenge myself. We ought not to ever allow our fear of doing something for God dictate our willingness to step out in faith for God. And so it was a great time. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're a guy in our church or you're maybe watching this and a friend shared it with you, man, we'd love to meet you. And we had some new guys that were not a part of our church that were there. We had some guys that were a part of our church there. And it's just a great time together. And so then, of course, today we're going to be meeting at 10 a.m. And again, if you need the location for that, you can message here or send me or James a text, and we'll get you the address. Jude. And so we're actually going to be in Jude 14 through 16, verses 14 through 16 today. And the big idea that we're going to talk about today, and I'm excited about this because we're living in a season right now with our church, and no doubt you're in a season, we're all in a season socially, but certainly you're probably in some sort of a season where you're seeing people that just aren't really acting faithful, you know? From the standpoint of being a follower of Jesus. I literally had a conversation just earlier this week where there was a guy we were sitting down with, and he was just kind of expressing his frustration of how people will claim to be a Christian or claim to be a follower of Jesus, but they don't really play the part, you know. And I think we've all been frustrated with that. Maybe before we became followers of Jesus, we were frustrated with that. And certainly after we become a follower of Jesus, we can be frustrated with that as well. And so, but the big idea that we're going to talk about today is that staying faithful, we want to stay faithful. God calls us to stay faithful, even when others are not being faithful. And in a large, focus that Jude does in this passage we're going to look at is he focuses on the aspect of judgment, which is not really where we start. You know, it's if you're trying to encourage someone to stay faithful, you usually don't start with "or else." You know, maybe when you were parenting your kids and they were younger, it was like, "Do what I say, or else." You know, and maybe you've been on the receiving end of that as a child. You know, you better obey, or else. You know, and so sometimes that can be a short-term fix for a long-term problem. But that's kind of where Jude starts at today, and so. As we jump back in, I want to kind of start us off with a question. You know, have you ever allowed the opinions of other people to change how you act? Have you ever allowed the opinions of other people to change how you act? Certainly, all of us went through middle school and high school, and you've got maybe a level or a story about that. There was this gentleman named Randy, and he was getting dressed for church, and you know, like every guy on the face of the planet, he's a little insecure about how he dresses, right? And so he looked at his wife, and they had been married for probably 20, 30 years. They're kind of an older couple. And he said, "Honey, do you think I should change?" You know, and of course, Randy's talking about his shirt, but his wife took an opportunity because she saw an opportunity here. And she said, "Well, are you talking about like just your shirt, or are you talking about like a wholesale life change?" You know, and so I don't know if you've had, you know, maybe a moment like that as well, where you were kind of talking about something really simple and they went super complicated and deep on you. And poor Randy, right? Maybe you've been in that situation where your wife's like, "Yeah, I think we're talking about a bigger change is needed here," you know. And certainly Bethany, you know, has probably thought that. I think God has never actually said that, but. You know, I can remember in my own life, you know, being in middle school, being in high school, you know, wanting to fit in with the crowd, wanting to fit in with cool people, like whatever that means, right? You know, you get out of high school and you're like, none of that means anything, you know? And, but you know, you want to fit in, you don't want to be like a goody two-shoes. And I remember often, you know, I would end up getting myself in trouble, you know, with my parents and people that cared about me and loved me because I didn't want to seem like a goody two-shoes, you know? I wanted to be like, whatever, respected, or people think I was kind of cool or whatever. And so, and I know you've got 1,000 scenarios running through your head maybe where you've done something similar to save face, you know, right, as they say. And so people can kind of pull us into change that we're not even really sure we want to make, right? And as we think about change, there was a letter that was written to President Jackson. This goes all the way back to 1829. It's actually dated January 31st. And just listen to this letter that the president was sent from an individual about railroads, okay? This is kind of fascinating. He says, "As you may know, Mr. President, railroad carriages are pulled at the enormous speed of 15 miles per hour. Whoa. Whoa. By engines, right? By engines which, in addition to endangering life and limb of passengers, roar and snort their way through the countryside, setting fire to crops, scaring the livestock, and frightening women and children." I mean, oh, the horror of the locomotive, you know? It's terrible. And the Almighty certainly never intended that people should travel at such breakneck speed. And always a good idea to bring God into your case when you're really just passionate about something not changing, you know. And this was written by Martin Van Buren, who was the governor of New York at the time. And I thought about saying something about the governor of New York, but I'm not going to do that today. But you know, this is funny to us, right? I mean, 15 miles an hour, the breakneck speed. You know, I mean, you would have thought right now, if you would have taken this guy's letter serious, you would have thought there would be no crops, there would be no cities, they would have all been burned down to the ground because of the locomotive doing 50 miles an hour through the deal. And so we see this, you know, appeal for change or appeal for a lack of change. From something that we obviously know is very, very silly. Obviously, we're trains run everywhere nowadays, and America's not on fire, at least for the reasons of locomotives anyways. And while it is funny, right, that we ought to be aware that there are some things that should not change. And certainly the railroad situation, this needed to change, right? This needed to move forward. But there are things, right, that don't need to change. And I think as we consider the passage that Jude's talking about today, what we're going to learn is that our faithfulness, like your faithfulness to Christ, my faithfulness to Christ, should never change. It should absolutely never, ever change. And I would even submit to you that as we think about change, changing for the sake of growth is a good thing. Changing for the sake of following Christ more emphatically, more passionately is something, those things should change. But changing for the sake of change or changing for the sake of other people is a fool's errand. And we all know this because I'll bet, like me, when I changed for the benefit of other people's opinion of me, it actually didn't really work out that well of me, right? In some cases, I ended up embarrassing myself in front of those people, and they liked me less, or they didn't like me any more than they originally did. So change for the sake of growth is good. Jude's not talking about don't change. But again, as we talk about faithfulness to Christ, this should never, ever change. And we should never allow anything to change our faithfulness to Jesus Christ. And I would say that if you and I are supposed to be the type of people, right, that are supposed to love God and love people, if we're to love people and make disciples, then I would submit to you and I today that we cannot afford to be people that are drawn away from our present course. I mean, we're living in a day and age now more than ever that people need you and I and people that bear the name Christian to be faithful to Jesus, that are faithful to following Him. We're in a time where your friends, your family members, your co-workers, people in your sphere of influence, we are living now more than ever in a season where our faithfulness matters even more, in some cases, to the public witness of Jesus Christ. Now, our faithfulness to Jesus always matters, okay? I'm not trying to make this like 2020 is the year that really faithfulness matters, because you know what? It's going to matter in 2021. And it's going to matter in 2025. And it's going to matter in 2040 and 2050 if we're all still around, okay? Faithfulness is always going to matter. It mattered in 95. It mattered in 2001. It just, faithfulness from God's people always matters. And you and I, as we consider this, need now more than ever to answer that challenge that we heard from Kashadov last week, right? That we need to be people that are salty for Jesus and that bring light into the room with us. And our faithfulness to Christ is what allows us to do that. So if you felt the pull to shift from Christianity to a cultural argument during this season, if you felt the pull to pull from Christianity for a political stance during this season, if you felt a pull to move from Christianity to something other than loving God and loving others, I want you to understand that the people that Jude is writing to felt a very similar temptation during their life. And what he's writing about here ought to help you and I examine why it's so important for us to be faithful when other people are unfaithful. So look at Jude 14. Notice what the Bible says. It says, "It was also about these that Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute what? To execute, let's all say that together, to execute judgment, right? On all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and all of the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." I don't know about you, but that's a lot of ungodliness that Jude uses. I mean, he uses that word several times. They're They're ungodly, they do ungodly deeds, they do ungodly acts in ungodly ways because they're ungodly sinners. I mean, this is times as a preacher, you're glad that you didn't write the Bible, because you just get to call people ungodly. You're all ungodly, and Jude said it, I didn't say it, right? Now, Jude is referencing the book of Enoch, okay? Now, you'll notice that the book of Enoch's not included in the canon, so I thought it would be kind of interesting to kind of give you some information as it relates to, why did they include certain books in the Bible and not other books in the Bible, okay? And so, now, again, for those of you that maybe are watching online with us, you're going to see this, and some of you can even access this after the fact. There's an online link above in the show notes that has digital notes, and all this will be in here. So if you're not able to write this down right now, don't sweat it. You can pull this up and email this to yourself a little bit later. But there are generally 5 reasons why a book of the Bible is included in the canon versus not included in the canon. Those questions that are asked are these. Was the book written by a prophet of God? Okay, and if so, then they included it. If not, it went to further questioning. Second of all, was the writer confirmed by acts of God? Like a burning bush or raising people from the dead. These acts, right, that would associate and validate this individual's role. Thirdly, does the message tell the truth about God? And what's fascinating about the Bible is it was written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors on several different continents, many of them which did not live at the same time or near each other, and yet there's a unified message about the truth of God. Fourthly, we see, did it come with the power of God? In other words, was it able to effectual inward to outward change in the people that read it? And no doubt, you and I can all attest to the fact of reading a passage of Scripture that's included and see it have an impact in our inner man that demonstrates and changes us in our outward behavior. And then lastly, was it accepted by God's people? And a very important witness of the Spirit would help validate that it belongs. And so, again, while he quotes from the book of Enoch, this is not to suggest that Jude somehow viewed this as this should have been included in the Bible. Okay, it just means Jude was a well-read man, and it means that he understood that you could read some other things and draw correlations to the truth of Scripture that was out there. Okay, and so Jude goes on, and actually you could actually find this quote in the book of Deuteronomy as well. And so it's not just uniquely to the book of Enoch. And so what we find, though, is that Jude is saying, look, judgment is necessary. Okay? Judgment is necessary. As he begins to explain that your faithfulness and my faithfulness ought not to be contingent on the unfaithfulness of others, he starts with judgment. And a couple of things about judgment, okay? We see, first of all, from this passage, judgment is coming swiftly. Judgment is coming swiftly. So when you and I are living our lives, when people are going about their lives, we need to understand when God's judgment comes, when he returns to execute judgment with his angels, right, that he says here, it's going to come, he says what? He comes suddenly. And this, again, reminds us as judgment is necessary, that it's going to come swiftly. Second of all, judgment is going to come on ungodly people. So it's not going to come on you and I in the sense of whether we go to heaven or hell. It's going to come on ungodly people. Now, what's Jude talking about here, okay? Well, he's talking about two things. There is the great white throne of judgment, okay, that you'll read about in the book of Revelation. And then you'll read about the judgment seat of Christ that you read about in the book of Corinthians. And one is for ungodly people, and we could say all people are ungodly, but this particular, the great white throne of judgment is for those that have never placed their faith in Jesus Christ. In other words, they're ungodly not because of what they do, but because of what they have failed to believe. And then on the other side, you have the judgment seat of Christ, which is where you and I. Some people say, "Oh yeah, you Christians, you just want to, have people believe in Jesus because then you can live any way you want with no, impact or consequences of your actions." Well, that's obviously not true because Jude's talking about a twofold judgment. Judgment will come upon the lost, and it will come upon the saved as well. Now, thank God we know that Corinthians helps you and I understand that the judgment we go under as believers is not that we may lose our position in Christ, but we will certainly lose our gifts and our rewards and our opportunities that we had with Christ. In other words, Jude, like Paul would say, there are things that you and I, as we stay faithful to the Lord, are building that are gold, silver, and precious stones. But if you and I move in an unfaithful way, we are building wood, hay, and stubble. In other words, when God comes and examines your work and my work as a follower of Jesus, the question is, what will remain from that judgment? And we'll talk about what will remain in this message, but I just wanted you to understand judgment is necessary because it's going to come swiftly, it's going to come on ungodly people, and it's also going to come on ungodly acts. Again, this will be, the great white throne of judgment and the judgment seat of Christ. And so why this is so important is that judgment gives us, as followers of Jesus, a good reminder that while we're not, again, in danger of losing our position with God, we can certainly miss out an opportunity with God. So the call from judgment is to stay faithful because you and I have an opportunity to not only hear, well done, thy good and faithful servant, but you also have an opportunity to reap the crown of life and the crown that God gives that we cast all back at their feet. And so faithfulness matters in light of judgment, right? And so again, that's not really where you and I start in our appeal to stay faithful. But Jude wants to be crystal clear because the people that they are dealing with in their church are doing things and acting in unfaithful ways as if there is no judgment. And so Jude wants to remind not only the people that are acting unfaithfully, there's a judgment. He's also wanting to remind the people that are thinking about not acting faithfully to realize, hey, there's a judgment. And certainly there's nothing wrong with remembering that we are not gods among ourselves. We are accountable to God. We are His creation. We are His creatures. We are made in His image. And so notice the types of people that were around in their own church. And listen, this is so important for us, okay? Because we can be tempted to think that churches only of a certain size, or churches in a certain area, or just certain churches are like reserved and protected from this sort of behavior. What I mean by that is unfaithful people. Listen, I've seen huge churches have unfaithful people in them. And we've seen people in our church be unfaithful. So my point is that we ought not to ever get this perspective that something is wrong if we see unfaithful people. Unfaithfulness is common, okay? But the reason I want to draw attention to that is because look at the type of people that were in this church. Now, this isn't just people that were inside the church. This is the people that were jockeying for leadership position in the church. So that almost makes it even worse, right? So look at this. These are grumblers. Wow. Okay. Who wants to follow a grumpy leader, right? They're malcontents. They're following their own sinful desires. Now you know this because let's refresh a little bit, right? They were spreading Gnosticism, which meant they were teaching that the spirit is pure and the flesh is defiled. So as long as the spirit is pure, I can do with it whatever I want with the body because the spirit's always pure. So what they would do is they would tell people, you can live any way you want. You can be a Christian and you can just live any way you want. So they were following their own sinful desires. These were leaders in the church that were like, I can act the way I want, I can do what I want, say what I want, think what I want, express myself how I want, and there's no way for you to say that I'm wrong because the spirit's pure. Okay. They're loudmouth boasters. Wow. Great. Yeah, sign me up. And here's the thing, right? Showing favoritism to gain advantage. And again, okay, unfaithfulness is common. It was common in this church that an apostle was writing to. Think about that for a second. Now, this has been a huge blessing to me because I used to think if I ever saw anything going crazy in our church, I used to think that was my problem. Like it was my responsibility. Like it was somehow reflective of my leadership. But you know what I've learned to understand, and Jude helped me with this, is that there are acts of unfaithfulness are not always reflective of leadership. What people do is not always reflective of my leadership. But also as a point of encouragement for you, you ought to understand that unfaithfulness is common. It's not because God doesn't love our church. It's not because the devil's attacking our church more than us. It's just the reality. If you read the Bible, you know what you come to the conclusion is? People don't love God. They're unfaithful. Romans 1-3 makes it very clear. The Gentiles rejected God, the Jews rejected God, the whole entire world rejected God, right? they were dissatisfied with their lot with God. They're malcontent. In other words, they're constantly blaming God and other people for their problems. They followed their own sinful desires, and they were boasters about and showing favoritism. In other words, they would do favors for people in the church to make sure that they got promoted. That's crazy, right? And so again, right, unfaithfulness is common. So don't be distracted by people's unfaithfulness. Look, I know that we see it. I know that you can't ignore it. But I think sometimes we think when we see people acting unfaithfully, we let it get to us more than we really should. And that's what Jude's saying. He's saying, look, I know you got grumblers in your church, you got malcontents in your church, you got people doing whatever they want with their bodies and with their words and all this stuff. You got people running around boasting, you got favoritism in the church. And what's Jude's statement? Stay faithful anyway. Stay faithful anyways. Don't get your eyes off of Christ. Keep your eyes on Christ. And don't worry about that, right? And narrow is the way that leads to salvation. So what do we take away from all this? Well, faithfulness is our call. That's really what Jude is saying. He's saying, stay faithful. I know you got people that are unfaithful in your church. I know that you got people that are unfaithful in society. You stay faithful. And here's what I want you to understand. When we are faithful, it keeps us set apart for Jesus. When you stay faithful, people notice. When you gather here, when you pray, when you worship, when you read, when you fast, when you tell people about Jesus, people notice. Your faithfulness will set you apart from other Christians. Your faithfulness will set you apart from the unchurched. Your faithfulness sets us apart for Jesus. Secondly, it will show your position in Jesus. And again, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude, right? These people are heavy on what Christians do, aren't they? You can go and you can make a huge case about you're not acting like a Christian right now. Now, we don't ever use that as a judgment in the sense of like criticizing people. But the point is that your position in Christ should always be manifest. If I claim to be a Jesus follower, I should do things that a follower of Jesus does, right? I should do things that Jesus does. Thirdly, it preserves our labor for Jesus. Remember, right? In light of judgment. So your faithfulness retains your labor for Christ. If we go unfaithful, we lose those rewards. We don't get those crowns. We don't get to hear, well done, thy good and faithful servant. And then lastly, as we think about faithfulness, is that remember, it is only and always God's role to judge. It is only God's role to judge. It is only His job to judge. What's our job? To love Him and love other people. To love God and love other people. What's our job? Our job is to love. Our job is to serve. Our job is to pray. Our job is to give. Our job is to gather. Our job is to worship. Our job is to make disciples. And our job is to baptize people. That is our job. That is all that we're responsible to do. And why this is so important as we think about Jude talking about judgment is because if we're not careful, we'll think it's our job to judge. And yet Jude makes this clear, doesn't he? He makes it clear. God is coming to judge quickly, to judge the ungodly, and to judge their ungodly acts, not me and you. And here's the thing, right? Because when we look at others, when we start looking at their faithfulness and we want to start judging them, we are immediately pulled off of our race. Now, I'm not saying we don't take time for other people, and I'm not saying we don't care for people. Obviously we invest in people. What I'm saying is their unfaithfulness ought not to detract our main focus upon Jesus. Because if we start looking at their unfaithfulness, we're off track. It takes us off our race. When we look at others, we limit our ability to love that person because you're all about their unfaithfulness. I can't see past their unfaithfulness. I can't see past their ungodly acts. And so we limit our ability to love that person. Fourthly, when we look at others, we limit our ability to serve that person. How many of you have lost the ability to look someone in the eye and treat them courteously because of what they do? That's a problem. That's an indicator. That's an indicator that I'm not focused on being faithful. I'm focusing on your unfaithfulness.
Fourthly, when we look at others, we limit our ability to connect with that person because we can't see past their unfaithfulness. We are so focused on their unfaithfulness, we fail to see what God could do with their faithfulness and through our faithfulness in the life of that individual. So the challenge today, right? Hebrews 12:1. What's the Bible say? Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Keeping our eyes on Jesus helps us do what Jude is challenging these Jesus followers to do, and what I hope each of us and all of us watching will decide to do as we go our separate ways here today. What is that? Be the Christian, okay, that has their eyes so fixed on Jesus that the unfaithfulness of others cannot impact your faithfulness. Be that type of follower. Be that type of individual that is so fixed on Jesus, when someone's unfaithfulness starts happening over here, you're just still moving on. You're not going to stop praying because they stop praying. You're not going to stop gathering because they stop gathering. You're not going to stop gathering because of some sin they committed. You're not going to stop doing these things that Jesus calls us to do because of someone's unfaithfulness, because you're looking unto Jesus. Secondly, be the Christian that has their eyes so fixed on Jesus that you can love and serve the most unfaithful people so that they can get a glimpse of God's love through you. Like we talked about, if we're not careful, we'll look at someone's unfaithfulness and that's all we can see. And what Jude is calling these people to be, I mean, think about it, right? It's not like these people are all around, these people that Jude's walking to. I mean, they go to church together. They're in the same building together. They're singing hymns together. They're hearing preaching together. And some of them begin to do things that Christians ought not to do. They begin teaching things that Christians ought not to teach. And what's Jude say? Does Jude say go rabble-rouse them? Does he say, now that makes you okay to be unfaithful? No. He says, stay faithful. He says, stay faithful. You see, without your faithfulness, without my faithfulness, how will people know about Jesus? If you and I can't move past unfaithfulness in those around us, how in the world will people trust Jesus? If we can't see through the unfaithfulness of human beings and frail creatures and keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, how will people believe in the gospel? Because here's what we just need to remember, right? We are all capable of unfaithfulness. I've been unfaithful. You've been unfaithful. We know people in our church have been unfaithful. So we're called to be faithful. We all have the capacity to be unfaithful. And we all know that other people have the potential to be unfaithful. And we must remember, right, that Christians are never the standard of Christianity. Ever. Thank God. Pastors are not the standard for Christianity. Thank God. Jesus is the standard for Christianity. And so when you begin to see someone struggling with faithfulness, don't let that move you into unfaithfulness. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to feel justified. Oh, well, they don't come anymore. Oh, they don't pray anymore. They hurt this individual in our church. Man, there are stories around in churches and Christians who have been to Christians that we could spend the next hour and a half telling each other about. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just a reality. And so when those bad things happen, we will feel justified in, lack of prayer, or lack of giving, or lack of attending, or lack of fasting, or lack of communion. Right? We'll feel justified if you're focused on their unfaithfulness. But you know who's never been unfaithful? Jesus. God has never been unfaithful. He's never hurt you. He's only loved you. He's only given for you. He's only died for you. He has only sacrificed everything for you. What human could you ever say has ever done that for you? I've never done that for Bethany. Maybe I'll try. I don't know. I'm just saying, when we focus on people's unfaithfulness, we will begin to rationalize our own unfaithfulness because we'll feel justified in it. And I want you to understand Without our faithfulness, people won't know. People won't be able to believe. They won't be able to trust in Christ if we're not faithful. Now look, maybe we all know this here, but I want to just take a moment and say this. There's only one way to become godly, right? The judgment that God executes, He executes on ungodly sinners and their ungodly acts committed in ungodly ways. And there's only one way to be made godly. And it's not by religion, and it's not by going to church, and it's not by giving, and it's like all these things we talk about, right? Praying, fasting, communing, gathering, worshiping, giving, gathering with one another, praying with one another. All of that doesn't get you godliness. The death, the burial, and the resurrection of, as well as all of us here today, would be, look, stop looking at people who are unfaithful for your determination to remain faithful. Your standard of faithfulness is not in Christians, it's not in pastors, not in ministry leaders, though we have a responsibility to you as ministry leaders. I want you to understand that your call, my call, our standard of Christianity is Jesus Christ Himself. And so I want to thank you guys for all being here today. Thank you for joining us online. Share the video. Let us know it was a blessing. Maybe do a watch party a little bit later today, but super thankful for the message that Jude brought to us today about just keep your eyes on Jesus. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody here back next Sunday at 10 a.m. God bless. All right.